Hello and welcome to week 5 in suprasegmental phonetics and English pronunciation. Week 5 brings us almost halfway through the semester. So in fact, this will be the last lecture before test number 1. And there's some details about the test available in a separate video. But today's lecture, I'm just going to basically review and summarize the content up until now. And we're going to start with the kind of most recent content and then work backwards to look at how the grouping of segments into syllables, syllables into feet, are then the basis for establishing the rhythm of spoken English. And then after test number 1, we'll look in more detail about the rules for determining which syllables get stressed, which syllables don't get stressed in words. And then we'll look at larger expressions, including compound words, phrases, and sentences. But for this lecture, we'll just show an outline. Right? We're going to first, as I said, talk about the foot and foot structure of English metrical feet, and then see how they represent stress in words. And then I'll bring up a new point, which is word minimality. Because of the requirements for particular segments in syllables and syllables in feet, there's actually a limit to how small words can be in English. And by words, I mean nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs. The limit doesn't actually apply to small grammatical markers, like some prepositions or articles. We'll then go backwards and look at syllables, and in particular syllable weight, since syllable weight influences how syllables get grouped together into feet. And then we'll look inside the syllable and remember the constituents that make up syllables, since the segments in those constituents determines the syllable weight. And then we'll look further down into the segments themselves and remember that they've been grouped into constituents based on their sonority, that the rising and falling sonority that naturally happens in sequences of segments leads to sonority peaks in those sequences, and those sonority peaks form the basis of grouping segments into syllables, because those peaks, the segments that are sonority peaks, form the nucleus of a syllable, and then the segments before and after them get grouped together into those syllables. And then that will bring us to the beginning where we started, which was recognizing that segments fall into different segment classes based on their sonority. Okay? So as I say, we're going to start with the most recent topic, which is the basis of rhythm in spoken English, which for English as a stress-timed language is based on the foot. Now we've seen that the timing of English rhythm, the kind of beat to it, if we think in musical terms, falls on primary stress. And it's important to remember that stressed syllables have come in two types. There's primary stress and secondary stress. And I'll try to repeat this point a few times because I had a few questions during the week by email that made it clear to me that I haven't explained this difference quite as well enough. So we know, for example, that some syllables are unstressed, and those syllables usually undergo vowel reduction. So the vowel gets pronounced as schwa. And stressed syllables don't have vowel reduction. But among the stressed syllables, there's a difference between those with primary stress and those with secondary stress. Primary stress usually includes higher pitch than secondary stress. And importantly, each word must have one primary stress. In some cases, there's only one stress, but if there's more than one stress, if there are 2 or 3 or 4 stressed syllables, only one of them will have primary stress. And in terms of the rhythm of speech, those secondary stressed syllables fall on the kind of offbeat in the timing of English speech. I'll refer to this in a minute when we look at some examples of sentences. Now, the placement of stress within words or even in phrases is based on how the syllables are grouped together into feet. And so we've begun to look into how that happens, and we'll learn more details actually after test 1, but I want to review what we've studied so far. Okay. So in a sentence like, my sister has always loved action movies, the natural rhythm for that has stress in certain places, and then the pitch of the voice rises on those primary stresses and then falls until we come to the next primary stress syllable. So in a sentence like, let's see if I can time it with my animation. My sister has always loved action movies. Okay. If you listen carefully, my sister has. My sister has. The pitch of the voice goes up for sister has. Always. Loved. Now in the case of loved, we have a monosyllabic foot. So the falling pitch happens across the pronunciation of a single syllable. Loved. Action movies. Action movies is a compound noun, which we'll learn about later, but it has one primary accent, which is the action movies. The movies, the moo of movies, has secondary stress, so it's lower. My sister has always loved action movies. That rhythm, my sister has always loved action movies, is the result of grouping syllables into feet, and feet into words and phrases. Now, we haven't learned the rules for what determines where the stress gets placed. So if that's not clear to you yet, don't worry. We'll study that in more detail after test number 1. The point here is just to see what our objective is. Our goal is to understand this rhythm pattern. In a sentence like, the iPhone was released last week. The word released has stress on the second syllable. Released. The r is an unstressed syllable, and as a result, it kind of joins the previous foot. Right? The iPhone was released last week. The iPhone was released last week. Or everybody. Right? Everybody wants to study. Now the word phonetics stresses on the second syllable, and as a result, the first syllable, the f of phonetics, becomes part of the preceding foot. Everybody wants to study phonetics. Everybody wants to study phonetics. So you can hear that this rhythm pattern is really the result of the timing of these primary stresses. And then returning to our original sentence, Anne hates cold, wet snow. Each of these is a monosyllabic foot, and therefore we get this kind of unusual rhythm pattern. Anne hates cold, wet snow. Each one has falling pitch across the length of the syllable because each one is a monosyllabic foot. Okay? Anne hates cold, wet snow. Now, a foot, which is sometimes called a metrical foot or a stress foot, always contains one syllable or more than one syllable. Okay? We'll see that there are different foot types, and it simply depends on the content of those syllables. Importantly, each foot has exactly one stressed syllable. And here's where some confusion arose, so let me be clear. It could either be primary stress or secondary stress, but each foot has one stressed syllable. If there's only one syllable, so if it's a monosyllabic foot, it's stressed. If it's a bisyllabic foot, a foot with two syllables, only one of them will be stressed. Okay? In addition, in order to be a kind of full enough foot, there needs to be at least two rhyme segments. Now, segments don't belong directly to the foot. They belong to a foot through their inclusion in a syllable. Right? Segments belong to syllables, syllables belong to feet. But a foot in English must have at least two rhyme segments. Now, they could be in the same syllable. And remember, we use this Greek letter sigma to mean syllable. So a syllable that has a nucleus and a coda would be a single syllable with two segments in the rhyme. Right? Or you could meet this requirement by having two separate syllables, each with one segment in its nucleus, right, in the rhyme. So a bisyllabic foot with two light syllables, or a monosyllabic foot where that syllable is a heavy syllable. Both of these meet this minimum requirement that there be two segments in the rhyme. Two rhyme segments within the foot. Okay. And as a result, this leads to different kinds of foot types. And remember, I'm going to use parentheses to represent feet, so that a single syllable surrounded by parentheses means a monosyllabic foot. Two syllables in parentheses means a bisyllabic foot. So a monosyllabic foot could include either a nucleus and a coda, two segments in the rhyme, or a branching nucleus, that's also two segments in the rhyme. Either way, that forms a heavy syllable. So going forward, not so much today, but after test number 1, I'm going to refer to heavy syllables using the letter H, meaning heavy. And just remembering that that could include either a branching nucleus or a nucleus and a coda in a branching rhyme. Now, a bisyllabic foot could be one in which there is a single segment in the nucleus of each syllable. Right? Basically, two light syllables. Right? And again, if the parentheses are around two syllables, it's a bisyllabic foot. And here I'm using the letter L to mean light. So that would be two light syllables. Now, we learned last week that bisyllabic feet can also be made up of a heavy syllable followed by a light syllable. So a syllable with a nucleus and a coda, for example, followed by a syllable with a simple nucleus, could form a bisyllabic foot. And that would be a high-low bisyllabic foot. A heavy-light, H and L get used in two different ways. When we talk about Japanese phonetics and Japanese phonology, we use H and L to mean high and low when talking about pitch. In English, it's heavy and light. So a heavy syllable followed by a light syllable can form a bisyllabic foot. Right? Now, it's important to remember that English foot structure is restricted to these two types of bisyllabic feet. Light, light, heavy, light. English does not have any feet that are a light syllable followed by a heavy syllable. There are other languages with that kind of foot structure, but English foot structure does not permit a light syllable followed by a heavy syllable. We have no light, heavy foot types. Nevertheless, we do have words made up of two syllables in which the first syllable is a light syllable and the second syllable is a heavy syllable. The word today, for example, t has just a vowel in the nucleus and a vowel that is reduced to schwa, t, t. day has a branching nucleus, right? Today. But the day forms a monosyllabic foot, and the t is in a pre-foot syllable. Okay? This becomes important when we start to look at the rhythm of phrases and sentences. But the representation then would be a pre-foot syllable followed by a monosyllabic foot. A monosyllabic foot that contains a heavy syllable. Okay. Now, moving on to words, right? We can talk about words that have a pre-foot syllable, like today. Today would be an example of a monosyllabic foot, but we also have words that have with a pre-foot syllable where the foot is a bisyllabic foot. Either a bisyllabic foot that is high, heavy, light, or a bisyllabic foot that is light, light. Right? So we have words like aroma. Right? Ro is a tense vowel that's lengthened in a branching nucleus, Roma. The vowel in m or ma becomes reduced to schwa because it's unstressed, Roma. The pre-foot syllable, the letter A in spelling, is also pronounced as a schwa because of vowel reduction, aroma. In the case of vanilla, well, vanilla is actually two light syllables, n and l. English spelling has a double L, the two-letter L's, but in fact in pronunciation there's only one L. The syllables are v, n, l, vanilla, with stress on the first syllable, but it's a light syllable. And we'll learn more about that later because it's on the stress is on the first light syllable because it's the first syllable in the foot. This is going to become an important characteristic of English feet. In English, the first syllable of a foot is a strong syllable. Now, if there's only one syllable, it's the first syllable, and therefore it's strong. But if there's more than one, the first one will be strong, and the second or others will be weak syllables. Now, in a word like canal, right, this is like today, where the monosyllabic foot has a pre-foot syllable. The pre-foot syllable is not in a foot, so it does not have stress, and it must be unstressed, and will always have vowel reduction, resulting in a schwa pronunciation. The now, because it's stressed, never has vowel reduction. Now, we can also have a post-foot syllable. Right? So in words where an extra syllable comes immediately after a foot, so in a word like, I've already told you, so I'll jump to the end. Right? We never get this post-foot syllable in following a monosyllabic foot. And the reason is a sequence of a heavy syllable followed by a light syllable will always be grouped together into a bisyllabic foot. A heavy syllable, light syllable, bisyllabic foot. Right? Words that fill these examples are like sympathy. Right? Sympa is a foot. Thi. Sympathy. Citizen. Citizen. Sida is the foot, followed by zun. Now, sympathy, that final syllable, thi, you might notice is not usually pronounced with schwa. I won't go into the details today, but the word final position kind of protects the pronunciation of that vowel. So it is unstressed, right? It's a bit shorter. Well, it's shorter for stress, but then it gets a bit lengthened because of its word final position. But its pitch is lower, and its level of intensity, kind of its loudness, is always lower. Sympathy. Citizen. In the case of citizen, the vowel is not final. There's the nasal comes after it. So in citizen, the vowel does reduce to schwa. Okay, let me stop here, and then in the next video we'll look at stress in sentences.